Maya Thompson was tired when she pulled into her driveway that Thursday evening. She'd spent the entire day at the veterinary clinic, dealing with emergency cases and worried pet owners. All she wanted was to kick off her shoes, make some tea, and relax with Atlas, her German Shepherd. But as she stepped out of her car, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. 3 houses down, a group of men were standing around a pickup truck staring directly at her. When she met their eyes, they didn't look away. Instead, one of them smirked and said something to the others that made them laugh. This wasn't the first time. Maya had been living in Willow Creek for 3 years now, and she'd grown used to the cold shoulders and suspicious glances. Being one of the few black residents in this suburban neighborhood meant she stood out, whether she wanted to or not. Most people were polite enough, giving her quick nods or tight smiles when they passed. But there was always that undercurrent, that feeling that some folks wished she'd chosen to live somewhere else. Somewhere that looked more like her, as one neighbor had once awkwardly put it. Maya tried not to let it bother her. She was a 42-year-old veterinarian with her own practice, a beautiful home she'd bought with her own money, and a clean record. She paid her taxes, kept her lawn neat, and minded her own business. After her divorce 2 years ago, she'd actually thought moving to a quiet suburb would bring her peace. Her ex-husband had been controlling and critical, always telling her she wasn't good enough. Starting fresh in a new place was supposed to be healing. But peace was hard to find when you constantly felt like an outsider in your own neighborhood. Inside her home, Atlas was waiting by the door like he always did. The moment Maya walked in, his tail started wagging, and he pressed his massive head against her leg. She scratched behind his ears and smiled despite her exhaustion. Atlas was more than just a pet to her. He was family. She'd adopted him 2 years ago from the police department after he'd been injured during a drug raid. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, and though he'd recovered physically, the department had retired him from active duty. Most retired police dogs went to their handlers, but Atlas's handler had moved overseas and couldn't take him. That's when Maya stepped in. From the moment she met Atlas at the shelter, she knew they were meant for each other. He was calm but alert, gentle but powerful. His training was evident in everything he did, from the way he walked beside her to how he assessed every person who came near. The shelter staff had warned her that police dogs could be intense, that they needed experienced owners who understood their needs. But Maya had grown up with dogs, big ones too, and she wasn't intimidated. Besides, she saw something in Atlas's eyes that broke her heart. Loneliness. Just like her, he needed a fresh start. Living with Atlas changed everything. He gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. When she came home late from work, she never worried about walking into an empty house. Atlas was always there, ready to protect her if needed. During the day, he'd lounge around the house looking like any regular pet. But Maya knew better. She'd seen him switch into working mode when strangers approached too quickly, or when unexpected noises startled them during walks. He was always watching, always ready. The neighborhood had mixed reactions to Atlas. Some people crossed the street when they saw him coming, even though he'd never shown aggression toward anyone who wasn't a threat. Kids would point and whisper, and their parents would pull them closer. A few neighbors had even complained to Maya that having such a large dog in the neighborhood made them nervous. She'd politely reminded them that Atlas was perfectly trained and that German Shepherds were family dogs. But she knew what they really meant. They already didn't want her there. A big dog just gave them another reason to be uncomfortable. What Maya didn't know was that she'd caught the attention of someone far more dangerous than judgmental neighbors. Derek Vaughn had been watching her house for weeks. He was a 35-year-old ex-convict who'd spent 5 years in prison for armed robbery and assault. Since getting out, he'd fallen in with a group that called themselves the Patriots, though there was nothing patriotic about them. They were a local gang with ties to white supremacist groups, the kind of people who believe certain neighborhoods should stay a certain color. Derek had convinced himself that he was cleaning up Willow Creek. In his twisted mind, people like Maya didn't belong in his community. He'd grown up in this area, and seeing it change made him angry. So when he noticed Maya's nice car and well-kept house, he didn't just see a successful woman. He saw a target. He started driving by her place at different times, noting when she left for work and when she came home. He noticed the security cameras outside and the alarm system sign on her lawn. But he also noticed something else. She lived alone. No husband, no kids, no one to protect her except that dog. Derek wasn't worried about Atlas. Sure, the dog looked intimidating, but Derek figured it was probably just for show. Most people got big dogs for the image, not because they actually knew how to use them for protection. Plus, he'd dealt with dogs before. A piece of meat with some sleeping pills would handle that problem easily enough. What really interested Derek was what might be inside that house. A woman living alone in a place like this probably had jewelry, cash, maybe even a gun he could steal and sell. And honestly, scaring her a little wouldn't hurt his cause either. Maybe she'd get the message and move somewhere else. He brought the idea to his crew one night while they were drinking at his place. His younger brother Shane was immediately on board. Shane was only 27 and still trying to prove himself to Derek, always eager to go along with whatever his older brother suggested. Then there was Kyle, a skinny guy in his 30s who was good with locks and alarm systems. Brett and Travis rounded out the group, both in their late 20s, both angry at the world and looking for someone to blame. When Derek laid out his plan to rob Maya's house, they all agreed it was easy money. They spent 2 more weeks planning. Derek wanted to make sure they did this right. They figured out that Maya worked late every Friday evening, usually not getting home until after 8. That would give them plenty of time to get in, grab what they wanted, and get out. Kyle studied her security system from the outside and determined that cutting the power to the house would disable most of it. They'd go in through the back door where they'd be less visible from the street. In and out in 20 minutes, that was the plan. What none of them bothered to research was Atlas's background. They saw him as just another house pet, maybe a little bigger than most, but nothing they couldn't handle. If they'd done even basic research on retired police dogs, they would have learned that these animals don't forget their training. They would have learned that German shepherds used in police work are selected for their intelligence, loyalty, and natural protective instincts. They would have learned that a dog like Atlas could assess threats in seconds and respond with controlled aggression that could take down grown men. But Derek and his crew were too confident, too blinded by their prejudice and greed to think things through. In their minds, they were about to teach Maya a lesson and make some money doing it. They had no idea they were about to walk into a situation that would destroy their lives and prove just how wrong they were about everything. Maya wasn't weak. She wasn't an easy target, and Atlas wasn't just some pet. He was a trained protector who would defend his home and his owner with everything he had. The gang was about to learn the hardest lesson of their lives, and by the time Friday night came around, nothing would ever be the same for any of them. Friday started like any other day for Maya. She woke up at 6 in the morning, took Atlas for his usual walk around the neighborhood, and then got ready for work. The autumn air was crisp and leaves were scattered across the sidewalks. Atlas trotted beside her perfectly, stopping when she stopped, sitting when she paused to tie her shoe. People who saw them that morning had no idea this would be the day everything changed. Maya certainly didn't. She was thinking about her schedule, about the appointments lined up at the clinic, about whether she had enough groceries for the weekend. Before leaving for work, Maya did what she always did. She made sure Atlas had fresh water, filled his food bowl, and turned on the radio to a classical music station. She'd read somewhere that music helped dogs feel less lonely when their owners were away. She gave him a good scratch behind the ears and told him she'd be home late tonight. Atlas watched her from his spot by the window, his dark eyes following her as she grabbed her keys and headed out the door. He had no way of knowing that tonight he'd need every bit of training he'd ever received. Maya's day at the clinic was busy but manageable. She treated a cat with an infected paw, gave vaccinations to 3 puppies, and spent an hour calming down a panicked owner whose rabbit had stopped eating. These were the moments she loved about her job. Helping animals and their worried humans always felt meaningful. Around 5 in the evening, her receptionist reminded her about the late appointment scheduled for that night. A family was bringing in their elderly dog who'd been having trouble walking, and they could only come after work hours. Maya didn't mind staying late. She never did. Helping animals was more important than getting home at a specific time. Meanwhile, across town, Derek and his crew were going through their final preparations. They'd spent the afternoon getting their supplies together. Kyle had his lock-picking tools. Brett brought a couple of heavy-duty flashlights since they'd be cutting the power. Travis packed a large duffel bag for carrying out whatever they stole. Shane was nervous, pacing around Derek's living room and asking questions about what they'd do if something went wrong. Derek told him to relax. Nothing was going to go wrong. This was the easiest job they'd ever pull. Derek had one concern, though, and that was Atlas. Even though he wasn't particularly worried about the dog, he didn't want it barking and alerting neighbors. So he'd prepared some meat laced with sleeping medication, the kind vets use to calm anxious pets before procedures. He'd gotten it from a guy who worked at a pharmacy and owed him a favor. The plan was simple. They'd toss the meat into the backyard first, wait 15 minutes for the dog to find it and fall asleep, then go inside. Derek felt pretty clever about this. He told the others that by the time they were loading up their van, that dog would be snoring on the kitchen floor. At 7:30, just as the sun was setting, the 5 men piled into Derek's van and headed toward Willow Creek. They drove past Maya's house once to make sure her car wasn't in the driveway. It wasn't perfect timing. They parked 2 blocks away in a grocery store parking lot where the van wouldn't look suspicious. From there, they walked through backyards and side streets, staying out of sight. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people were inside having dinner or watching television. Nobody was paying attention to 5 men moving through the shadows. When they reached Maya's backyard, Derek pulled out the prepared meat and tossed it near the back door. They crouched behind some bushes, waiting and watching. Inside the house, Atlas heard something land on the porch. His ears perked up immediately. He moved to the back door and sniffed the air. His training kicked in instantly. Unknown object appearing suddenly. Potential threat. He didn't touch the meat. Instead, he moved away from the door and positioned himself in the hallway where he could watch both the front and back entrances. This was exactly what he'd been trained to do. Assess, position, wait. After 15 minutes, Derek assumed the dog had eaten the meat and was knocked out. He gave Kyle the signal to move forward. Kyle approached the electrical box on the side of the house and cut the main power line with wire cutters. The house went dark. The outdoor security cameras stopped recording. Inside, Atlas heard the click of the power going out. His body tensed. Every muscle was ready. He moved silently to the stairs, positioning himself in the shadows at the top. He could hear footsteps outside now. Multiple people. His breathing slowed. This was it. Kyle made quick work of the back door lock. It took him less than 3 minutes to pop it open. The 5 men slipped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were grinning, confident. Derek led the way through the kitchen and into the living room. He swept his flashlight around, looking for the dog. Nothing. No sleeping German shepherd on the floor. No dog at all. He figured maybe it was upstairs in a bedroom, probably already knocked out from the medication. They moved toward the staircase. Brett whispered that they should grab the television and laptop he'd spotted in the living room first. Derek shook his head. The good stuff would be upstairs. Jewelry, cash, maybe a safe. They could grab the electronics on their way out. The 5 men started climbing the stairs, their flashlights bouncing off the walls. Shane was in the middle of the group, still nervous. He kept looking over his shoulder. Travis was at the back, already thinking about what he'd buy with his share of the money. Derek reached the top step first. He turned left toward what he assumed was the master bedroom. That's when Atlas struck. The dog had been waiting in complete silence, his body coiled like a spring. He launched himself from the shadows with a speed that seemed impossible for an animal his size. His jaws clamped down on Derek's forearm with crushing force. Derek screamed, a sound of pure shock and pain. His flashlight flew from his hand and clattered down the stairs. The other 4 men froze for a split second, their brains trying to process what was happening. Then chaos erupted. Atlas released Derek's arm and immediately went for Shane, who was closest. The dog's training was evident in every move. He wasn't just attacking wildly. He was targeting limbs, going for arms and legs, trying to disable threats without going for kill shots. This was how police dogs were trained. Neutralize the threat, don't murder it. Shane tried to kick Atlas away, but the dog was too fast. He grabbed Shane's leg and pulled hard, sending him crashing into Kyle. Brett swung his flashlight at Atlas, trying to hit him in the head, but the dog ducked and lunged at Brett's arm. Brett screamed and dropped the flashlight. Now the hallway was almost completely dark, except for one flashlight that had rolled into a corner, casting weird shadows on the walls. Travis tried to run back down the stairs, but Atlas was on him in seconds. The dog grabbed his ankle and held on. Travis fell forward, tumbling down several steps before catching himself on the railing. Blood was everywhere now. Derek was clutching his arm, feeling the deep puncture wounds where Atlas's teeth had sunk in. Shane's leg was bleeding through his jeans. Brett was backing away, holding his injured arm against his chest. Derek yelled at everyone to fight back, to get the dog off them. Kyle pulled out a small knife he'd brought for cutting through windows if needed. He slashed at Atlas, but the dog moved with incredible agility for his size. The knife missed, and Atlas responded by going after Kyle's knife hand. Kyle screamed and dropped the weapon. The sound of men shouting, the dog growling, and bodies crashing into walls filled the house. It was nothing like they'd imagined. This wasn't a quick, easy robbery. This was a nightmare. Shane managed to get to his feet and stumbled toward the stairs. He was panicking now, all thoughts of stealing anything completely gone. He just wanted out. Travis was already halfway down the stairs, limping badly. Derek realized they were losing this fight. This wasn't just some pet. This was something else entirely. Something trained and deadly. He shouted at everyone to grab whatever they could and get out. In their panic and desperation to escape, Brett spotted a laptop on a dresser in one of the rooms. He grabbed it. Kyle, despite his injured hand, found some jewelry on a bathroom counter and shoved it in his pocket. Derek saw a small safe in the master bedroom closet. It wasn't too heavy. He and Shane grabbed it together, grunting with effort and pain. Atlas was still attacking, still defending his territory. He bit at their legs as they struggled down the stairs with the safe. The 5 men crashed through the back door and into the yard, bleeding and terrified. Atlas chased them all the way to the property line, barking ferociously. His bark was different now, deeper and more aggressive than his normal sound. It was the bark of a working dog, a warning that carried through the quiet neighborhood. Lights started turning on in nearby houses. Someone shouted from a window asking what was going on. Derek and his crew didn't stop to answer. They ran through backyards, dragging their injured bodies and their stolen items. Shane dropped the safe halfway to the van because his leg hurt too badly to carry it. Derek picked it up, cursing and bleeding. By the time they reached the van, they were a mess. Blood stained their clothes. Their arms and legs throbbed with pain. Travis was crying. Shane looked like he might throw up. They threw everything into the back of the van and Derek drove off, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Back at the house, Atlas stood guard at the broken back door. His training told him to hold his position until his handler returned. He was alert, ready for another attack if the intruders came back. But they wouldn't. They were too busy bleeding and realizing they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. And Maya was about to come home to discover that her loyal companion had just saved everything she owned, and possibly her life too. Maya finished up with her last patient around 8:15 that evening. The elderly dog she'd been treating had arthritis, and she'd spent extra time showing the owners how to give him his medication and make him comfortable. They were a sweet couple in their 70s who clearly loved their pet like family. As Maya walked them to the door and watched them carefully load their dog into their car, she felt that familiar warmth that came from helping people. This was why she'd become a veterinarian in the first place. She locked up the clinic, set the alarm, and headed to her car. The parking lot was mostly empty now. Streetlights cast orange pools of light across the pavement. Maya felt tired but satisfied with her day. She was looking forward to getting home, maybe ordering some takeout since she was too exhausted to cook. As she drove through the quiet streets toward Willow Creek, she thought about Atlas waiting for her. She smiled, imagining him pressed against the window, watching for her car like he always did. But when Maya turned onto her street, something felt wrong. She couldn't quite put her finger on it at first. Then she noticed that her house was completely dark. Every light was off. That was strange because she always left the porch light on when she went to work. She pulled into her driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the dark house. Maybe the bulb had burned out. That happens sometimes. She grabbed her purse and phone, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. As she walked toward her front door, she heard it. Barking. But not Atlas's normal happy greeting bark. This was different. Aggressive. Protective. The kind of bark that meant something was seriously wrong. Maya's heart started pounding. She fumbled with her keys, her hands suddenly shaking. The moment she pushed open the front door, Atlas came running from the back of the house. Even in the darkness, she could tell something had happened. He was pacing, agitated, moving between her and the hallway that led to the back door. Maya flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. The power was out. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. That's when she saw it. The living room was a mess. Things were knocked over. There were dark spots on the floor that looked like blood. Her stomach dropped. She moved the light around and saw more blood, droplets leading toward the stairs and back toward the kitchen. Atlas kept barking, trying to lead her somewhere, trying to show her something. She followed him to the back door and her breath caught in her throat. The door was hanging open, the lock broken. Someone had been in her house. Someone had broken in. Maya's mind raced. Were they still here? She grabbed Atlas by the collar and backed toward the front door, her phone already dialing 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. When the operator answered, Maya's voice came out higher than normal, frightened. She told the operator her address, told them someone had broken into her house, that there was blood everywhere. The operator asked if she was safe, if the intruders were still there. Maya said she didn't know. She'd just gotten home. The operator told her to get out of the house immediately and wait outside until police arrived. Maya didn't need to be told twice. She and Atlas went back out the front door and stood by her car, both of them alert and watching the house. The wait for the police felt like forever, but was probably only about 6 minutes. When the patrol cars pulled up with their lights flashing, Maya felt a wave of relief. 2 officers got out, a young man and a woman who looked to be in her 40s. The woman introduced herself as Officer Chen and asked Maya to explain what happened. Maya told her everything she knew, which wasn't much. She'd come home from work to find her house dark, the back door broken, blood on the floors, and her dog extremely agitated. Officer Chen asked about Atlas. Maya explained that he was a retired police dog, that she'd adopted him 2 years ago. The male officer, whose name tag read Rodriguez, looked at Atlas with new respect. He asked if Atlas had been home during the break-in. Maya said yes, he would have been. Rodriguez nodded slowly and said that might explain the blood. If Atlas had confronted the intruders, he probably gave them more than they bargained for. The thought made Maya feel sick and proud at the same time. Her dog had protected their home, but he'd been alone facing who knows how many people. Officer Chen asked Maya to stay outside while they cleared the house. She and Rodriguez went inside with their flashlights and weapons drawn. Maya waited, holding onto Atlas's collar, watching the beams of light move through her windows. After about 10 minutes, the officers came back out. Chen said the house was clear, nobody was inside. She asked Maya if she could walk through with them and see if anything was missing. Maya agreed, though the thought of going back inside made her nervous. They started in the living room. Maya's laptop was gone from the coffee table where she always left it. In the kitchen, things were knocked over, but nothing seemed missing. Upstairs was worse. Her bedroom had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled open, clothes thrown around. Her jewelry box was knocked over, and several pieces were missing, including a necklace her grandmother had given her. That hurt more than the laptop. The necklace wasn't expensive, but it meant everything to her. But the biggest shock was her closet. There was a space on the top shelf where she'd kept a small safe. It was gone. The safe had contained about $2,000 in cash, important documents like her birth certificate and passport, and some silver coins her father had collected. Maya felt her eyes burning with tears. This wasn't just about money or things. This was her life, her memories, her sense of safety. Someone had come into her home and taken pieces of her life. Officer Rodriguez was documenting everything with his camera. Officer Chen was looking around the hallway, studying the blood patterns. She called Maya over and pointed to the walls and floor. There was a lot of blood, more than Maya had initially realized. Chen explained that blood patterns could tell a story. Based on what she was seeing, there had been a significant struggle. Multiple people. Based on the different blood trails, and given Atlas's training and the defensive wounds pattern, it looked like he'd done exactly what he was trained to do. Chen knelt down to examine Atlas more carefully, asking Maya if she could check him for injuries. Maya went through his fur carefully, running her hands over his body, checking his legs, his face, his mouth. Amazingly, he wasn't hurt. Not a scratch on him. He'd taken on multiple intruders and walked away without a single injury. Maya hugged him tight, burying her face in his fur. He'd saved everything. If she'd been home when this happened, if she'd walked in on these people, who knows what could have happened to her. Officer Chen said they'd need to collect evidence. She called for a crime scene unit. Within 30 minutes, Maya's house was full of people. Technicians were taking photos, collecting blood samples, dusting for fingerprints. A detective arrived, a serious-looking woman in her 50s named Detective Lisa Park. She introduced herself to Maya and asked if they could talk. They sat in Maya's car with the doors open while Detective Park took notes. Maya told her everything again from the beginning. When she'd left for work, when she'd come home, what she'd found. Detective Park asked detailed questions. Had Maya noticed anyone watching her house recently? Had she had any confrontations with neighbors? Any issues at work? Maya thought about the men she'd seen staring at her earlier in the week, but she didn't know their names or where they lived. She mentioned feeling unwelcome in the neighborhood sometimes, but she couldn't point to anything specific. Detective Park asked about the security cameras. Maya's heart sank. She'd had outdoor cameras, but they were connected to the power. If someone cut the power, they'd stop recording. But then Maya remembered something. She had an indoor camera system too. A different one she'd installed 6 months ago after reading about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods. Those cameras ran on battery backup and uploaded footage to the cloud. She'd almost forgotten about them because she rarely checked the footage. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened the security app. Detective Park leaned in to look. Maya scrolled back to earlier that evening and pressed play. Both women watched in silence as the footage showed 5 men entering through the back door. The infrared camera caught everything clearly, even in the darkness. Their faces were visible. You could see them moving through the house with flashlights heading upstairs. Then the attack happened. Even though the footage was silent, you could see the violence of it. Atlas appearing from nowhere, taking down the first man. The chaos that followed. Men falling, trying to fight back, bleeding. The dog moving with precision, targeting arms and legs. It was brutal and beautiful at the same time. This wasn't a vicious attack. This was controlled force, exactly what Atlas had been trained to do. The men trying desperately to get away, grabbing items as they fled, the safe being carried out. The laptop, the jewelry. Detective Park watched the entire thing twice, then asked Maya to send her the footage immediately. This was gold, she said. Clear faces, clear evidence of forced entry, clear footage of the theft. With blood samples from the scene and these faces on camera, they'd identify these men quickly. Park explained that they'd run the blood through the DNA database. If any of these men had been arrested before, which seemed likely given how they operated, they'd get a match. Maya felt a strange mixture of emotions. Violation and anger about the break-in, fear about what could have happened, pride in Atlas for protecting their home, and something else too, a grim kind of satisfaction. These men had chosen her house, probably thought she'd be an easy target. They had no idea what they were walking into. They had no idea that her dog was trained by professionals, that he'd spent years taking down criminals. They'd underestimated her and her loyal companion, and now they'd pay for it. Detective Park told Maya she probably shouldn't stay in the house tonight. The back door was broken, and even though the intruders were unlikely to return, it wasn't safe. Did she have family or friends nearby? Maya shook her head. Her family lived 3 states away. Her closest friend was out of town for work. Park offered to have an officer stay outside overnight, but Maya said she'd get a hotel room. She couldn't stay here tonight anyway. The house felt different now, violated. As the crime scene team finished up and started packing their equipment, Detective Park promised Maya they'd catch whoever did this. The evidence was too strong. It was just a matter of time. Maya thanked her, then went inside to pack a bag for herself. And Atlas. As she moved through her ransacked bedroom, collecting clothes and toiletries, she kept thinking about those 5 faces on the camera footage. She didn't know who they were yet, but soon everyone would, and they were about to learn that some people should never be underestimated. Maya barely slept that night at the hotel. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those men on her security footage, walking through her house like they had every right to be there. Atlas sensed her anxiety and stayed close, resting his head on the bed beside her. Around 3 in the morning, she finally gave up trying to sleep and just sat there in the dark, stroking his fur and thinking about everything that had happened. The next morning, Detective Park called with news. The blood samples had come back with a match already. One of the intruders was in the system, a man named Derek Vaughn with a criminal record that included armed robbery and assault. He'd spent 5 years in prison and had been out for just over 2 years. Park said they were running his known associates through the system now, cross-referencing with the faces from Maya's security footage. She expected to have full identifications on all 5 men by the end of the day. Maya felt her hands trembling as she held the phone. These weren't just random thieves looking for quick cash. This was someone with a history of violence, Someone who'd already hurt people before. What if she'd been home? What if Atlas hadn't been there? The thoughts made her feel sick. Detective Park seemed to sense her fear and told her that officers were already looking for Derek and his crew. With clear video evidence and DNA evidence, arrests were coming soon. Maya just needed to be patient. By early afternoon, Detective Park called again. They'd identified all 5 men. Derek Vaughn and his younger brother Shane. A man named Kyle who had priors for burglary. 2 others named Brett and Travis, both with minor criminal records. More importantly, during their investigation, detectives had found connections between these men and a local group that promoted white supremacist ideology. They'd found social media posts, meeting attendance records, and communications that suggested this wasn't just a random break-in. Detective Park asked Maya directly if she thought she'd been targeted because of her race. The question hung in the air for a moment. Maya had wondered the same thing since the break-in, but hearing it asked out loud made it real. She told Park about the feeling of being unwelcome in Willow Creek, about the stares and cold shoulders, about those men watching her earlier that week. Park was quiet for a moment, then said they were pursuing this as a hate crime in addition to burglary. The charges would be more serious. The sentences would be longer. That evening, police executed simultaneous raids on the homes of all 5 men. Derek was at his apartment when officers kicked in the door. They found him trying to bandage his arm. The wound from Atlas's bite clearly infected and swollen. He'd been too scared to go to a hospital because he knew they'd report a dog bite to the police. Shane was arrested at their mother's house. Kyle, Brett, and Travis were picked up at a bar where they'd been drinking, probably trying to calm their nerves. The searches of their homes turned up everything. In Derek's garage, officers found Maya's safe still locked. They found her laptop. They found jewelry that matched descriptions of items stolen from Maya's house. But they also found something else: weapons, printed materials from hate groups, a notebook where Derek had written Maya's address and work schedule. He'd been planning this for weeks, watching her, studying her routines. It wasn't a random crime of opportunity. She'd been specifically targeted. Detective Park came to Maya's hotel room that evening to update her in person. She brought another detective with her, a man named Wilson who specialized in hate crimes. They sat in the small hotel room while Atlas watched from his spot by the window. They explained everything they'd found, showed her photos of the evidence. Maya looked at the picture of that notebook with her address written in it and felt her stomach turn. Wilson explained that Derek had a history of this kind of thinking, that he'd been radicalized during his time in prison. But here's what Wilson wanted Maya to understand. This case was solid. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage showing their faces, their DNA at the scene, her stolen property in their possession, documentation proving premeditation and racial motivation. All 5 men were being charged with first-degree burglary, conspiracy, possession of stolen property, and hate crime enhancements. Derek faced additional charges for being a felon in possession of weapons. They were looking at serious prison time. The news spread quickly through Willow Creek. By the next day, everyone in the neighborhood knew about the arrests. The story made the local news first, then got picked up by regional outlets. Reporters started calling Maya, wanting interviews. The story had everything that made news compelling: a racist gang targeting a black woman, a heroic retired police dog defending his home, clear video evidence, quick arrests. It was the kind of story that made people pay attention. Maya's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations, newspapers, podcasts, everyone wanted to talk to her. At first, she ignored them all. She just wanted to go home, to clean up her house, to try to feel safe again. But her friends and colleagues convinced her that maybe telling her story could help. It could show people what still happened in quiet suburban neighborhoods. It could make others aware. So she agreed to one interview with a local news station. The interview aired on a Wednesday evening. Maya sat in her living room, Atlas beside her, and talked calmly about what had happened. She explained how she'd felt unwelcome in Willow Creek from the beginning, how she'd tried to ignore it, to just live her life, how she'd come home to find her house broken into and her loyal dog had protected everything she owned. The interviewer asked if she was angry. Maya said she was, but mostly she was tired. Tired of having to prove she belonged. Tired of being seen as an easy target because of her skin color. The response was immediate. The video went viral, shared thousands of times across social media. People from all over the country reached out with messages of support. Some shared their own stories of feeling unwelcome in predominantly white neighborhoods. Others thanked her for speaking up. The veterinary clinic where Maya worked was flooded with calls from people wanting to thank her and Atlas. Someone even started a fundraiser to help Maya replace what was stolen and repair her home. But the response in Willow Creek itself was mixed. Some neighbors, people who'd barely spoken to Maya in 3 years, suddenly showed up at her door with apologies and casseroles. They said they'd had no idea she felt that way. They claimed they weren't like those men. They didn't harbor those kinds of prejudices. They'd just been busy with their own lives. Maya accepted their words politely but couldn't help feeling cynical. Where were these people before? Why did it take something this dramatic for them to care? Other neighbors stayed silent. A few even seemed resentful that the story had brought negative attention to Willow Creek. One woman at the grocery store made a comment about how Maya was making too big a deal out of a simple robbery, turning it into something it wasn't. Maya just walked away. She had no energy to argue with people who refused to see reality. The most meaningful support came from unexpected places. A family 3 streets over, an interracial couple who'd moved in recently came by with their 2 kids. They said they'd felt some of the same coldness Maya described, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. They thanked her for speaking up and offered their friendship. A retired teacher who lived alone reached out to say she'd noticed the way some neighbors treated Maya and felt ashamed she'd never said anything. She apologized and offered to help however she could. Atlas became something of a local celebrity. People would stop Maya during walks to take pictures with him. Kids asked if they could pet the hero dog. Someone wrote a letter to the local paper suggesting Atlas receive a commendation from the police department. The attention was overwhelming, but Maya could see that Atlas was handling it with his usual calm dignity. He seemed to understand that all these strangers approaching with treats and praise were friendly. At the veterinary clinic, Maya's colleagues rallied around her completely. They organized a security upgrade for her home, pooling money to install better cameras and stronger locks. They created a schedule so someone would check on her every evening until she felt safe again. Her boss gave her a week off with pay to recover and deal with everything. The support from her work family meant more to Maya than anything else. These were people who'd seen her professional skill and personal character every day for years. They knew who she was. 3 weeks after the break-in, Maya attended a preliminary hearing for Derek and his crew. She'd been warned by the prosecutor that she might have to see them in person, that it might be difficult, but Maya wanted to be there. She wanted them to see her face, to know that she wasn't scared anymore. She walked into that courtroom with her head high, wearing a professional suit, looking every bit the successful woman she was. Derek and the others were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands cuffed. Derek's arm was still bandaged from where Atlas had bitten him. When he saw Maya sitting in the front row, his face went pale. She stared directly at him, her expression calm but firm. The prosecutor presented the evidence. The video footage was played in the courtroom. Maya watched the judge's face as she saw 5 men breaking into a home, watched a dog defend his territory, watched criminals flee with stolen property. The defense attorneys tried to argue that this was just a burglary, that there was no proof of racial motivation. But the prosecutor pulled out Derek's notebook, read his social media posts, showed evidence of his connections to hate groups. The judge wasn't buying the defense's arguments. She ordered all 5 men held without bail until trial, citing flight risk and danger to the community. As they were led out of the courtroom, Shane looked back at Maya with something like regret on his face. Derek just looked angry. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. They called out questions to Maya as she walked to her car. She stopped and turned to face them. She said she was grateful that justice was moving forward. She thanked the police department and Detective Park specifically for their quick work. She said she hoped this case would make people think about the assumptions they made about others, about who they saw as belonging, and who they saw as targets. Then she got in her car and drove home. That night, back in her house, which finally felt like hers again, Maya sat on the couch with Atlas sprawled beside her. She thought about everything that had changed in just a few weeks. Her sense of safety had been shattered but was slowly rebuilding. Her place in the community had shifted. Some bridges had been built. Others had been exposed as never existing in the first place. But through it all, this dog beside her had never wavered. He'd protected her home without hesitation. He'd proven that loyalty wasn't about race or prejudice or who belonged where. It was simply about love and devotion, and that was something Derek and his crew would never understand. The trial began 4 months after the break-in, on a cold February morning. Maya had been dreading this day and anticipating it at the same time. She wanted it to be over, wanted these men to face consequences, but she also knew that sitting in a courtroom listening to every detail would be exhausting. She wore a navy blue dress and her grandmother's earrings, the ones that hadn't been stolen because she'd been wearing them that night. Atlas stayed home, though the prosecutor had joked that bringing him might intimidate the defendants. The courtroom was packed. Local news crews filled the back rows. Maya recognized some of her neighbors, the ones who'd reached out with support after the break-in. Her colleagues from the veterinary clinic had arranged their schedules, so at least 2 of them could be there each day. Detective Park sat near the front, along with several other officers who'd worked the case. Maya felt grateful for all these people showing up, but she also felt exposed. Her life was about to be discussed in public, examined by strangers, picked apart by defense attorneys trying to minimize what had happened. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Jennifer Walsh. She'd met with Maya several times to prepare for the trial, walking her through what to expect, helping her stay calm when talking about that night. Walsh was known for being tough but fair, and she'd told Maya directly that this case was important to her. Hate crimes didn't always get prosecuted properly, she'd said, but this one had too much evidence to ignore. They were going to make sure Derek and his crew understood the full weight of what they'd done. The defense attorneys looked exactly how Maya expected. 3 middle-aged men in expensive suits, the kind who could make anything sound reasonable if you listened long enough. They'd already tried multiple tactics to get the charges reduced. They'd argued that calling this a hate crime was an overreach, that Derek and his friends were just opportunistic thieves. They'd tried to suppress the notebook evidence, claiming it was taken illegally. They'd even suggested that Maya's security cameras violated some obscure privacy law. The judge had denied every motion. Opening statements began. Walsh stood and addressed the jury, 12 people who'd been selected after days of questioning. She laid out the case simply. 5 men had targeted a black woman living in a predominantly white neighborhood. They'd watched her, studied her schedule, planned their attack. They'd broken into her home intending to steal her property and send a message that she didn't belong. What they hadn't counted on was her retired police dog, trained to protect and defend. The evidence would show premeditation, racial motivation, and a complete disregard for Maya's rights and safety. The defense attorney for Derek, a man named Robert Chen, tried a different angle. He admitted his client had broken into Maya's home. That wasn't in dispute, but he was just a desperate man looking for money, not a hate-filled criminal. Yes, Derek had made mistakes in his past. Yes, he'd associated with people who had questionable views. But this was just a burglary that went wrong. The dog had attacked them. They'd grabbed what they could and fled. Calling it a hate crime was the prosecution trying to make headlines, not seeking justice. Maya sat through these opening statements, trying to keep her face neutral. Hearing her trauma reduced to a simple burglary made her angry. Hearing Derek described as desperate rather than dangerous made her want to stand up and scream. But Walsh had prepared her for this. Defense attorneys would try to make their clients seem sympathetic. That was their job. The evidence would speak louder than their words. The prosecution called witnesses over the next 3 days. Officer Rodriguez testified about arriving at Maya's home that night, finding blood throughout the house, seeing the broken back door. Officer Chen described the blood patterns and what they indicated about the struggle. Detective Park walked the jury through the investigation, how quickly they'd identified suspects through DNA evidence, how the raids had recovered Maya's stolen property. Then came the digital forensics expert who analyzed the security footage. The courtroom went silent as the video played on large screens. Jurors leaned forward, watching 5 men break into Maya's home, watching Atlas defend his territory with precision and controlled aggression. Several jurors looked upset. One older woman covered her mouth with her hand. When the footage ended, the expert explained that the video showed clear faces, identifiable features, and undeniable proof of forced entry and theft. The expert who analyzed Derek's notebook and electronic devices testified next. She displayed social media posts where Derek had complained about minorities moving into his neighborhood. Messages between Derek and his brother discussing which houses might be good targets. A group chat where all 5 defendants shared racist memes and talked about taking back their community. The defense objected repeatedly, trying to keep this evidence out, but the judge allowed it all. It went directly to motivation. When Maya was called to testify, her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Walsh started with basic questions. How long had she lived in Willow Creek? What did she do for work? How had she acquired Atlas? Maya answered calmly, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking in her lap. Then Walsh asked about that night. Maya described coming home from work, finding her house dark, hearing Atlas's aggressive barking. She described walking through her home with a flashlight, seeing blood, realizing someone had broken in. Her voice caught slightly when she talked about finding her grandmother's necklace stolen. Walsh asked how that made her feel. Violated, Maya said, like someone had reached into her life and taken pieces of her history that couldn't be replaced. Walsh asked about living in Willow Creek. Had Maya felt welcome? Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. She said some neighbors had been kind, but others had made it clear through their actions and attitudes that they didn't think she belonged. Small things mostly. Cold stares. Conversations that stopped when she approached. Assumptions about who she was. She'd tried to ignore it, to just live her life. But the break-in had confirmed what she'd always suspected. Some people saw her as an outsider, maybe even a target. The defense attorney's cross-examination was uncomfortable. He asked if Maya had any proof that Derek specifically targeted her because of race. Couldn't it just be that she had a nice house that looked like it contained valuable items? Maya said she couldn't read Derek's mind, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The attorney asked if she'd ever spoken to Derek before the break-in. No, she hadn't. So how could she claim he was motivated by racism toward her specifically? Walsh objected, arguing that the prosecutor had already presented evidence of Derek's racist ideology. The judge sustained the objection. The defense attorney tried another approach. He asked if Atlas had ever bitten anyone before. Maya said no, but he was trained to defend against threats. The attorney suggested that maybe Atlas had overreacted, that his attack was excessive. Maya felt her temper rise. She said firmly that Atlas had done exactly what he was trained to do. He'd protected their home from multiple intruders who broke in illegally. The dog had acted appropriately. The men who broke into her house had not. The prosecution rested after Maya's testimony. The defense put on their case, which lasted only a day and a half. They called